Hey everyone, and welcome back to Hoffman Engineering. Today we're going to take a look at some of the 3D prints made on this resin printer, the Nobel 1.0A by XYZPrinting. The Nobel 1.0A is an SLA, or stereolithography printer, which uses a UV laser to cure resin. The end result is the object being pulled from this vat of resin. Resin printers can produce some wonderfully detailed parts, much more detailed than most filament-based printers can achieve, and that is what we're going to look at today. So here are some of the prints from this machine: a wonderful assortment of miniatures, chess pieces, Voronoi Pokemon, and other highly detailed prints. So let's start with my favorite showpiece, the Eiffel Tower. This piece tends to attract the most attention because it shows just how detailed these resin printers can get. This was printed 100mm tall with a layer height of 100 microns, and it took about 3 hours to print. Each of the individual struts are about 250 microns thick, and the printer had no problem printing these. There are even little embellishments at the top of the tower that show through perfectly. Next up are various Pokemon, generated with a Voronoi pattern. I've linked to all of these models in the description below if you want to print any of these out yourself. The smaller Pokemon are made up of lines that are only 0.6mm thick. That is way too thin to be able to be printed on a normal filament-based 3D printer, but it is no problem at all for the resin printer. They are incredibly delicate, but use very little resin to print, so perfect for giving to friends. Plus, who doesn't love Pokemon? Speaking of resin usage, here's the Stormtrooper Buddha. Printing with resin is different from printing with filaments, in that there is no concept of infill for resin printers. If you had a honeycomb infill, you'd just end up with liquid resin in all of the pockets. So either the parts are printed completely solid, or, like I did with this Buddha, you make the inside hollow and add drain holes to allow the uncured resin to escape. I used Mesh Mixer to make it hollow and add in the drains. 3 holes was overkill. You really only need 1 near the base to allow air to enter the cavity while printing. This Stormtrooper Buddha is a favorite of mine. I use it to test all kinds of 3D printers, and the resin printer was no exception. Next up is another great use of resin printers, printing miniatures for tabletop RPGs. Minis designed for 1-inch grids are tough to print with filament printers. Often the details are just too fine for the standard 0.4mm nozzle of a filament printer, but those details turn out perfectly using the Nobel. Just take a look at the teeth of the mimic or the individual fingers of the mage. And this also shows what kind of supports that XYZPrinting's slicer, called XYZware, will generate. Supports are just as critical on resin prints as they are for filament printers, so you end up with these wonderful pillars which are extremely easy to remove. For larger prints, you can end up with quite the lattice of supports. If you are a big fan of tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons, you may want to look into a resin printer if you're looking to print miniatures yourself. One of the problems that I ran into is actually finding detailed enough models to print. These 2 models by Dansie are some of the few I could find offering high resolution models. These are, aptly named, the Bearded Yell and the Joyful Yell. The Bearded Yell in particular is one of my favorites. The individual strands of hair look great in the clear resin, and you can even see the detail of the braid running from the top. The Joyful Yell shows where some ports can sometimes go wrong. There are a few instances where the support pillars were generated a little too close and actually fused with the model. There are techniques out there to sand and polish away these rough spots, but I have yet to try any of these. So, just be aware that there is the possibility of prints not turning out 100% like you'd expect. The Rook from Make Magazine is a go-to test for SLA printers. It has features such as the stairs and the double helix running through the center that would be impossible to manufacture using normal subtractive machining methods. It also has the words "Make, Resin Printer Torture Piece" embossed along the top, details which would just be too small to print with a filament printer. And of course I had to print the Millennium Falcon. This was another astoundingly detailed model, so it was worthy of a resin print. There is some Z-banding showing on this model, and 1 or 2 spots where the supports became part of the print, but overall it was a nice print. It printed 100% solid though, so it is very hefty prints and used a lot of resin. If I were to print it again, I'd see if I can make it hollow, like I did with the Buddha, and save a little bit of this really expensive resin. But I just love the details of the center turrets though, and of the satellite dish. And finally, we have the Octopus keychain, made up of 73 different segments that all fit together to give it a very fluid feeling motion. There was no sanding or adjustments needed to get the pieces to click into place. Printing it in the clear resin also gives the body some neat optical properties. The round shape forms a sort of lens. We might see that in use in some future projects. For now though, this octopus is a fun little fidget toy, and there is even a version on Thingiverse with a hole designed for you to put a keychain. So this has been my showcase of a few of the resin prints from the Nobel 1.0A by XYZPrinting. Coming in at about $1,500, less than half the cost of some other SLA printers out there on the market, I'm excited to see if this will encourage more companies to attempt to get into the hobbyist SLA markets. Let me know in the comments below if you have any suggestions for models for me to print, or if you'd like to know anything else about the Nobel. The next video will be a comparison between some of these prints and the same models being printed on a filament-based printer, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.